This is the line, a 170-kilometer-long, 500-meter-high city in the desert proposed by the Saudi Arabian government as part of their NEOM project, which supposedly will also include a port city and a futuristic mountain resort. In addition to a selection of smaller projects in the same area, the NEOM proposal is just the latest in a long line of very ambitious and expensive projects undertaken by this oil-rich region. So what is going on here? Why do these countries need to build such expensive and inefficient projects? The typical explanation is that these projects will attract tourists, which will subsidize these countries' economies when their oil runs out or is no longer demanded at the same level it is today. The UAE, Qatar and Saudi Arabia has all doubled down on this idea, spending billions on impressive projects and subsidizing global airlines to bring tourists into their cities. Once their oil runs out or is no longer demanded? What is the real reason behind these projects? The NEOM project with its 170-kilometer-long city is going to be funded through a development company wholly owned by Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, and it does have enough money to make this dream a reality. This project will cost almost $1 trillion and provide no meaningful quality of life improvements over a traditional city. The Gulf states have very small native populations, and before selling the oil they had very limited capital too. Simultaneously, their land was mostly inhospitable deserts. When they discovered oil on their land, the value of that land grew tremendously, because it was full of a highly in-demand source of energy, but the problems of a small unskilled workforce and limited capital resources remained. Most economies struggle with finding enough jobs for workers. The Gulf states struggle to find enough workers to fill out all of the jobs that their economies can create. The countries were able to get around these limitations by inviting foreign oil companies to provide their own capital and labor. But those companies were only interested in doing this to produce oil, so while their economy did grow, it grew to be entirely dependent on this one resource. Dubai before oil was a port for non-industrial fishing, and Saudi Arabia was largely made up of nomadic tribes, with a tourist industry that relied almost exclusively on Muslim pilgrimages to Mecca. The countries didn't have regular industries that they could grow out to compete with oil, so they had to build them from scratch. Now, since oil is so profitable, there are not many modern industries that can realistically compete with it. Emirates, Qatar Airways, and Etihad are some of the largest airlines in the world, which is a great play for these economies for a lot of reasons. Beyond prestige, these airlines bring their home countries. They are an industry that doesn't require much labor or care about the quality of land. These airlines employ a majority of their workforce from outside their home country. These airlines also assist with padding out the tourism industry, no matter how much the Gulf states invest in their cities. They are not going to be a tourist destination that competes with Western Europe, North America, or Asia Pacific. The environment is too hot, and outside of some very significant cultural centers, there is not much for tourists to experience, besides expensive hotels and shopping centers. It appeals to some people, but most tourists are looking for something a little bit more fulfilling on their travels. This city is glamorous enough to entertain people for a few days at most. Because tourists are not the primary target of these projects, the UAE in particular has extended some pretty generous incentives to businesses to establish themselves in the country. Businesses bring workers and workers spend money in the local economy on everything from housing to snack food. These megaprojects come in. Building something like the Palm Jumeirah took the cooperation of hundreds of companies and millions of workers. Even once they're finished, their international hotel chains, property development companies, law firms, landscapers, and everything in between required to keep these developments looking world-class. Once big businesses get established, smaller service businesses can form around them, and very quickly the country can develop a vibrant business ecosystem, where once there was only sand, big projects, and the promise of even bigger projects in the future, is a very effective way to entice companies into setting up offices, which will hopefully continue to operate long after the oil is gone. We only need to look to places like Singapore and formerly Hong Kong, to see that just being a good place to do business can be very lucrative. The UAE has a GDP of $358 billion, and Saudi Arabia has a GDP of $700 billion. Qatar has a GDP of $146 billion. UAE has a GDP per capita of $36,000, and Saudi Arabia has a GDP per capita of $23,000. Qatar has a GDP per capita of $61,000. Stability and confidence are an interesting one with these countries. The success of their plan to attract businesses are going to ride primarily on people believing they are a safe, stable place to live and work. These countries have had mostly stagnant GDP growth over the past decade, despite huge stimulus measures and oil reserves. Finally, industry. Obviously, the oil industry in all these countries is huge. Tourism is a great little bonus, and regular service businesses are making themselves at home. But all of that still ultimately depends on the oil industry for now. Thanks for watching, mate. Bye.